I am Brett Bultemeier. I am with the UF IFAS Pesticide Information Office. We're the office that does the manuals for pesticide licensing, the exams, all the things related to getting that pesticide license and kind of being as safe as possible. My background, I've worked with pesticides for almost 25 years now. Started in the field doing pond and lake management kind of in the Midwest, did a master's and PhD at the University of Florida. Go Gators. I may sprinkle another one of those in later. Again, in sort of the aquatic plant management. Then went to private industry for 7 years. And I worked for a company that did mosquito control, aquatics, and really started shifting more into operations there and kind of being a liaison between the customers, operations, sales, and doing a lot more compliance. How do you read a label? How do you navigate a label? How do you use these products as effectively as possible? And that brought me back to the university in 2019, where I currently am. So I've seen it from a bunch of different angles. I like to joke, those of you that are old enough to remember the show Home Improvement, I kind of like Tim Taylor. I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. Look a little bit more like Al Borland now with the beard and all, but I've definitely made some mistakes and learned from those and try to educate so that you guys don't have to make the same. Now, today, what we're going to be talking about is some of the changes that are coming from EPA. And it is not hyperbole to say that the changes that are going on in EPA now are the biggest changes that they've seen since they were founded. EPA was kind of founded, and there's been little things here and there, but it has been over the last 5 or so years a complete change of everything. They change how licensing is working, and the states have to comply with that. And then the big one we're going to be talking about today, endangered species, and how that impacts each of us using pesticides, particularly those that are in agriculture. And hopefully at the end of this, you'll know what the heck a PULA is, and you'll know that a BLT is not just a delicious sandwich, but it's something that will impact any of you that are farming. It's going to have an impact on your operations. So I am going to share my screen. And that this worked earlier, we will assume it is working. I see it on my screen. We should be good to go. All right, so let's get into it. How did we get into this realm where we're dealing with big changes? And it has to do with, in the Endangered Species Act, there's a little bit of a conflict. So what you have is FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. That does all the pesticide registration stuff. So that's EPA making sure that they know that when you use these products like you're supposed to, it doesn't cause unreasonable risk of harm to people or the environment. So this is all the testing that they do, the labels, all the rules that go with pesticide use. And as part of that, they're saying that you're not going to cause harm to people or the environment. EPA assumed that that was enough to comply with the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act is protecting endangered species. Go figure. The act itself describes what it's doing. But their protection is not that reduce risk or risk benefit. It is precautionary. Endangered species says no harm can occur. And these are two very different regulatory mindsets. One is saying, we're not saying that pesticides don't have a risk. We acknowledge that it's not an unreasonable risk of harm. Whereas ESA says no harm can occur, and EPA is now pulled into both of these acts. They must comply with their FIFRA requirements while also meeting the Endangered Species Act requirements, and that's kind of hard. Their, I guess, partners, we'll call them on this journey. So if EPA is doing the pesticide piece of it, who's doing the endangered species? And that would be the agencies. So this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Marine Fisheries Service, which is under NOAA. So now we've got EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and NOAA all trying to come together to find solutions. And you can imagine how that goes. Every federal agency wants to be the primary agency, and they know that they're right. And so when disagreements arise, they do this thing called a consultation. Now, you may think a consultation is, well, we're just going to have a conversation. That's pretty easy. Let's just sit down and talk about it. Well, when you've got federal agencies, it doesn't work that way. It's a very formal process that takes a long time. So the old model, what they did is EPA said, well, let us do the first cut. We're going to do a biological evaluation. So basically, they're looking at each species and each potential pesticide, and they're saying, all right, we're going to answer a couple of easy questions. Could that endangered species even come in contact with the pesticide? So let's say I have a product that's only approved for use in Arkansas. Well, the Pacific whales aren't at risk. So EPA says we can remove that pesticide from consideration for that species. Then they go, okay, we're going to look at something like glyphosate. Well, glyphosate is used kind of everywhere. So there is a chance that it could come in contact with certain endangered species. So then they start asking more questions. Is there a chance that there could be harm? Yes, no. And if there is going to be harm, how significant is that risk? And here, the EPA is doing this risk assessment on a single individual. So let's say I'm a flying spotted monkey. They are looking at as is there a chance that I, as a monkey, could come in contact with this product and I, as an individual, could be harmed? Then they give that information that's been sorted over to the other agencies, so Fish and Wildlife and Marine Fisheries, and then they will do a biological opinion. And now they will say things like, well, the bearded spotted ugly monkey is only in Kansas and Missouri from April to May, so you can't spray this product from April to May. That is their opinion on how you mitigate that risk. So you can imagine doing this process back and forth, where it's each pesticide, each species, and all of this back and forth can take a while. I mean, to give you an idea, a biological opinion can take 3 or 4 years, if not longer. And why we are in this real pickle is many of the initial registrations that were done for pesticides did not really consider the Endangered Species Act. Now, EPA would argue that because they were saying that there wasn't an unreasonable risk of harm to people or the environment, they did consider that. Well, now as these products are coming up for re-registration, they're doing this more in-depth analysis and they're way, way behind, to the point where I could actually amend this. The latest statistic I saw said that by 2034, they were only going to be 4% through all of the analysis that needed to be done. And you start doing the math on this, you go, well, re-registration is every 15 years. There was no way they were ever going to catch up. Not only did EPA kind of realize they wouldn't catch up, there was a lawsuit that said, EPA, you are in violation of your responsibilities to the Endangered Species Act. You need to change what you are doing and you need to do it quicker. And that was in courts kind of all across the country. So we're not going to get into politics, but the perception that there are courts that are maybe more liberal or more conservative, this went in front of both of those courts, and the court said, actually, EPA, you are way far behind. You are not in compliance. You must change what you are doing because your process is slow and unsustainable. Something new has to happen. So what they came up with was the Endangered Species Act work plan. And this was sort of their roadmap for how they were going to get out of this. It was actually a part of them settling that lawsuit. They said, these are the things we're going to do. And the courts and the litigants all said, yep, that will work if you will stick to your plan. Now, the first part of that plan, we're not going to talk much about today, but it's during the registration review. And as they're registering new products, they're allowed to do what are called interim decisions. So they're able to sort of make quicker decisions at the beginning of the pesticide being registered. We're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is their plans for drift and erosion control, because there was a recognition that the primary place pesticides are used, the largest use by far, is in agriculture. And in agriculture, it's very unlikely that an endangered species is going to depend on a farm for its survival. That's just not a habitat where you're likely to find endangered species. So if we can put things in place that show we're keeping the pesticides on the farm and not drifting or moving off site, that's a huge jump into saying that there is no risk of harm for that endangered species. Now, this isn't a huge lift because this is already built into what EPA does. They already say that to use these products, it has to stay on site. So now they're putting a little more formal bit to this and adding a little bit of teeth. The other piece is this BLT that we'll talk about. So endangered species can move. And maybe you do have an endangered species that could come onto the farm. Well, you don't want to make a decision that no pesticides could be used on a farm because one endangered species could get on there. It's where is that species? What is its range? How likely is that? So this BLT deals with that. The idea that we maybe need to have information that goes a little bit beyond real broad decisions that we're making. And then finally, the EPA did some looking at how do we evaluate not individual species, but start to look at them in big groups. So things like predatory animals, are there decisions that we can make for predatory endangered species that works across the board? And this is what they've laid out is their way out of being not in compliance and moving towards compliance. Now, all of this is way up there, high minded thinking, legal wrangling. How does this get to us that work with pesticides? Well, there's really only one way for EPA to communicate this. And if I was in front of a live audience, you all are going to repeat what I love to hear when people like me say this. The label is the, and every one of you across the Zoom universe and in the room there just said the law. And if you didn't, I'm giving you credit anyway. So the label is where EPA will communicate all of this information. And in my preamble here, I'm hoping you get the idea that this is complicated. How do you handle that on a label? Well, in the past, it was very broad statements, things like don't put it in soils that might leach, or don't put this in water, or the bee boxes. Hey, don't treat when there's pollinators around. But the EPA recognized that a label alone, as they are now, is not enough to handle all of these regulatory changes that they were going to do. So they had to come up with something else. And the first one out of the gate that they worked with was something called the herbicide strategy. Now, on a lot of these slides, you're going to see a QR code. If you have your smartphone, you can take a picture of that QR code. It will take you to this website, bookmark it. You can come back to it. So the herbicide strategy was their way forward with all of the herbicides. What regulatory decisions can we make in broad statements to bring us into compliance? So they started with a very diverse group of active ingredients and started saying what decisions, blanket decisions, can we make and how would these then work moving forward? So the idea was to streamline the decisions and get away from that product by product, species by species, and make much broader decisions. So to build their herbicide strategy, they used the following list of pesticides or herbicides. Clearly, that is not extensive as far as what you might use, but when you start looking at how these products behave, this is actually a fairly representative list. And they started making decisions and saying, what would that do? Oh, well, if we make this, it works for this pesticide or herbicide, but maybe not this one. So they really thought about making sure that everyone was kind of included. The idea behind the decisions that they made for the herbicide strategy is to reduce soil erosion and to reduce offsite drift. Again, if we go back to that roadmap, if you can ensure that a pesticide that's put on a farm stays on the farm, you have already reduced your risk of endangered species being exposed to those herbicides. And when they make these decisions, it's not just for the species. Let's go back to that monkey example. All right, I can go through, you sprayed kilzalzazine and it doesn't hurt me, but it destroys all of my food source. Well, now I'm going to starve. So EPA has got to make those decisions. And the idea is by making these decisions that reduce offsite drift and soil erosion, they can get into compliance faster. Now, what they did with that herbicide strategy is they looked at those herbicides, they started coming up with things, and they created what you may have heard of as a pick list. And what they've done here is they've said, okay, there are different farming environments that are going to behave differently. A laser leveled field in Florida that's on sand with berms all the way around it is at a different level of risk for drift or erosion compared to farming on a mountainside in Colorado, right? One of those is more risky, one of them is less risky. And so what they started doing is they give points depending on where you are, your soil type, and a few other things. And these points, if you have more points, there's a higher risk of drift or erosion, lower points, a lower risk. And what they're saying now is depending on where you are, you now have a point total that you must get before you can use your product. I'll say that again because it's kind of a change. As it stands now, you can go buy a product from the shelf. If you follow what's on the label, you can use that product. You're in compliance. This is saying the new format will be go buy a product. You will have a set number of points that you must meet. And if you can get enough points, you can use this product. If not, you're not able to use that product. And those points are achieved through various mitigation measures. And you can pick any of the things that are on this list, and it will add up to that total that will get you the ability to use that pesticide. So to give you an idea of some of the types of things that we're talking about, it's things like vegetative filter strips, on and on and on. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up this calculator that they have and show you how that might work. So when they say calculator, it's as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. And there's some instructions. It tells you what you can do. But if we're going to use us as an example, we've got Mr. Albert Gator. He's growing on swamp acres, and we're filling this out for today. I have a product. My product says that I need 9 points. 9 points is the largest amount you're ever going to have to get. Let's see if we can get there. And we start answering questions. So am I 1,000 feet down gradient from any of these areas? No, I'm not. I have to calculate points. Whereas if I were meeting any of these things, I would say yes. It tells me no mitigations are needed. I go use my product and we're done. But let's just say no for the sake of argument. Do I have anything that captures runoff? Some of these things like retention ponds or your irrigation water goes through tiles into a system that collects it and it pumps back through your system. If you had one of those, you would pick from the list. Let's say that I have a retention pond on site. Well, now I have 2 points, 7 more points to go. Let's go ahead and say that we don't have any of those. All right, my farm is in Hardee County, so I pick my county from the drop-down list. I already have 3 points baked in. Great. Am I tracking the mitigations that I'm doing? 100%. I'm using this Excel spreadsheet, and I'm documenting what I'm doing. There's a point. Am I doing a qualified conservation program? For you that are farmers here in Florida, that's the BMP. And a lot of people use that. That's 2 more points right there. We already have 6 points, and we've done next to nothing to change our farming practices. Is my field slope less than 3% flat laser leveled? Of course it is. I'm here in Florida. Do I have predominantly sandy soils? And it lists the various soils. Sure, let's say I'm on sandy soil. I can scroll down here and see that I'm at 15 points. I'm done. I document the things that are already a part of my operation, and we're done here. And then you get the idea that there's these other things that you can do to add points. But really, as much of this seems like a drastic change in the idea of I might not have products anymore, just by the virtue of how we do lots of our farms here in Florida, we already have points baked in, and it's not that difficult to get to the others. We don't have to do things like contour farming. You may not have to do some of the other things that are required. Not that you can't, you certainly can. And it may not hurt to document some of the other mitigations that you're doing, print this sheet, and away you go. So yes, it's different. Yes, it's a different process that we have to go through, but it's relatively self-explanatory and gets us to where we can use these products. All right, we'll set that calculator aside. And if you're wondering how I got to that spreadsheet, this QR code will take you to EPA's mitigation site, and then you can scroll down and there's a link that lets you download that spreadsheet. Then you could just save that and change it for wherever you are, however you are. And some of these links I'll make available afterwards as a physical link as well. All right, so the herbicide strategy, it is finalized and done. It is the law of the land, which means you are going to start seeing labels that will have this process on it. It will walk you through how to determine how many points you need, how to determine your points that you've got, and if you can use that product. So you'll use the mitigation menu to make sure you have enough points. If you do, you can use that product. Now, additionally, within this, there are some parts of that label that are going to start hard baking in offsets. So this is things like buffers that you must do from your field. And it might be that the standard buffer is 350 feet. Now, that's a lot. If you think about a small acreage field and you're losing 350 feet from every bit of that field, that's a hard hill to climb. They are also going to be releasing a calculator that will help you reduce that drift if you need to. So it'll be things like what rate are you using, what nozzle tips are you using, what pressure are you spraying at, and that can start to shrink that offset. They are still finalizing exactly what that's going to look like, so I don't have an example I can run through on that. That's still pending. But one of the things that I hope you've taken away so far is there's a lot of QR codes. I'm referencing a lot of websites. In fact, to be compliant with this label, you have to go to a website, which means websites are now label. So if your label has a website listed, the information on that website is as good as the label. It is just as enforceable and counts as part of a label. And I will tell you that I don't know when, we'll just say in the next 5 to 10 years, I would anticipate that EPA will do away with physical labels altogether. If you are already directing people to go to a website to be compliant, it makes so much more sense to have that label as a website because now it gives you the flexibility to make changes. All right, so we kind of covered herbicide strategy, but the title of my talk was PULAs and BLTs. When are we going to get to that? So normally I ask people if they've seen any of these pink maps, and almost nobody has seen them. They're here in Florida. They're here in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi. Is this SEC country? Is that what I'm doing? This is the SEC locations? Well, no, because they're in California. And it's not very often that California, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida have anything in common. But what they have in common is these pink areas are PULAs, and you need to use a BLT to understand what that is. All right, so now we're going to start decoding. I'm done using the acronyms. Now let's get into it. A PULA is a pesticide use limitation area. And what that is saying is the label is fine. The label tells you how to use this product, but if you're in this area, there are additional restrictions that will apply. And those restrictions could be as extreme as cannot use a pesticide in this area full stop, or you have to do some small minor thing, and it's everything in between. These PULAs are defined in area, that's within that geographic pink, and time. And this is really important because EPA understands that they can't have you have to check this right before you go to do a treatment. If you are a farmer, you are buying your chemical, and when it's time to spray, it's time to spray. So they have allowed that you can look forward in time. This may be one of the only places that you can time travel. So what you can do is you can look 6 months forward. So I could say today is January. I know I'm going to be using a product in May. That's 4 or 5 months from now. I can look and go, am I inside one of those areas or not? If I'm not, I lock that in. I go, that is my future no matter what. Because EPA also knows they're going to have to redraw these PULAs as endangered species move, as more information comes out. So they've kind of struck a balance. They're saying we're not going to let you look 3 years in advance or 15 years in advance, like has been the labels in the past, but we are going to give you basically a growing season to be locked in. You're locked into that regulatory environment, and even if they change it, yours doesn't change. Now you can consult the day of, but again, you're at risk if you bought product, you're ready to spray, and this PULA that you are in tells you you can't use it in the way you wanted it, or you can't use any pesticides at all. So looking 6 months forward, to me, is the way to go. This will just become a part of your operations. Now, how do we know if we're in one of these PULAs, and does it even apply to us? Because this isn't for every product. Well, you're going to refer to your label. And in the directions for use, you are beginning to see, and some labels exist already, and you're going to increasingly see it, this language that says endangered species protection requirements, and it directs you to a website. And a website on a label counts as label. And what it's directing you to is Bulletins Live 2. This is the BLT that we were talking about. This is the website that you can use to check. And again, this QR code will take you right to the Bulletins Live 2 website, because unfortunately, if you follow the website that EPA has listed on those labels, it takes you to another website and you have to click 3 more places before you get here. So I would bookmark this site, because I can tell you, you are going to have to use this, full stop. Every pesticide user, definitely agriculture in the state of Florida, is going to have a product that makes you use this at some point in time. Right now, you can see the PULAs that exist in Florida. They seem somewhat sparse, except that it's the entire coastline of Florida. And with what we are predicting will come in the future, you can go ahead and paint Florida pink. We are, depending on the day and how they count, either number 2 or number 3 for the number of endangered species and critical habitat in the country. So you're going to have to use this site. And what you're going to do is you're going to find where you are. You can either type in a latitude and longitude, you can do a city, you can scroll into where you are. You're going to put in the month that you're doing your application, and then the EPA registration number of the product you're using. And I would highly recommend doing it that way, because if you do what everybody wants to do and you just click a pink area, you go, well, this looks close to where I'm growing something. Let me click that pink. What you're going to find is it lists every product. And that can be a very extensive list. And you have all of these different products, and you have all of these different things that you have to do. It's much easier to put in your product if you're close to one of these PULAs and determine what your limitation would be. To give you an example, there is a bulletin in California that when you just click the thing and say, print me the bulletin, it's like 340 pages long. That is not usable. Whereas if I put my pesticide in there, it will pull up a 1-page or 2-page bulletin. So what is it telling you to do? Well, in the case of these crops, it's telling me that I have buffers, and it's telling me to avoid application from April to September. We will come back to that in a little later. So remember, this may restrict use period. It may restrict it during a period of time, or it may be you have to have some additional buffers built in. We do have a rather large one here in Florida. Those of you that are savvy recognize that these are the county boundaries of Palm Beach County. So what is the PULA for Palm Beach County? It's that you cannot use dicamba on those crops in this county. Full stop. That is a cannot use, off you go. So how do we find and do this? Well, the first place you have to go is the label. So if I look at this label, here's a herbicide, I'm looking through, I see my trade name, I see my active ingredient, I see my first aid, environmental hazards, directions for use. I do not see any websites listed. This is not one that is associated with a bulletin. I go use this product, away I go. I don't have to do the herbicide strategy because we don't see that listed here. I don't have to do anything other than follow the label. The label is all I need. And many of your products are going to stay this way. Next, you're going to move to one like this, where we move through and we see the endangered species requirement. So now I'm going to go to the front of that label. I'm going to grab my registration number, and now I'm going to go into Bulletins Live 2 and check. Do I indeed fall within this PULA, and is there anything I need to do? So I go to my bulletin. I say that I am growing right in this area right here. So I'm not in the pink, but boy, I'm real close to it. So I would put in my information. I'd put in my EPA registration. It's going to give me my bulletin. I'm going to print or screenshot that I am farming right here. You can even circle where your farm is. There were no restrictions that applied to me on that day. And then you just keep that and you go use your product as is. So follow your label, keep that bulletin showing that you checked and that that line wasn't in your location when you did that treatment. Now, if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no PULAs even near you, um, you're probably fine. But boy, if it were me, I'd want to show that this is where my farm is. It's not in that area. I'm good to go. Now, the final scenario, I have a product. It tells me that I have to check the bulletins live too. I grab my EPA registration number, I plug it in, and I am farming in this area right here. I am solidly in that pink. Well, up here, there's a green thing that says printable bulletin. And when you print that, it's going to show that this was for July of 2024. You could even circle your farming operations here showing that you were in it. And then it tells you what you must do. So you have a 310 infield wind direction spray drift buffer, on and on and on and on and on. So you would keep this as part of your record keeping, comply with whatever it says that you have to comply with, show that you could comply, and you're good to go. Now, where this may seem like a burden, but you need to be paying attention is because we still have the ability to make changes to this process as it moves forward. Case in point, there was a bulletin for malathion, which is used in mosquito control all across this state. And originally, this product had the bulletin's language, and it said that the original restriction was you could not do mosquito control using that product from April to December. Where could you not do mosquito control using that product from April, December in Florida? It was the entire coastline of the state of Florida. Yes, including places of Miami, Pompano Beach, Fort Myers, Naples. Do we have any people that live there? Obviously, we do. The mosquito groups quickly said this is not sustainable. You have to do something different. And actually, EPA listened. They went in and changed that within 2 months of having posted that these were the restrictions. They went in and exempted mosquito. Now, that only happened because the mosquito groups were ready. They were paying attention. They knew that this was coming. And they started to watch as these bulletins came in and said, hold on a minute. And because of that, they got changes made, which means even if your products don't have it yet, some of your products will, and you need to be in this system learning how it works so that you are prepared to have that conversation as well. All right, so what is the big change? What do we need to do now if I'm a farmer and I'm going to go use a pesticide? Well, some things haven't ever changed. You must follow your label. So I go to buy a product. I'm able to abide by the label. My next question is, do I have to do the herbicide mitigation stuff? Yes, the website is listed there. Go get your points. Then you can go use your product. If it has that herbicide strategy and you don't have enough points, you need to change some practice to get those points or you can't use that product. But let's say I bought it, I have enough points, I'm good to go. What next? Well, now I've got to check, are there buffer requirements, and then do all of the things to reduce that buffer should I so choose. Now, you don't have to reduce your buffer, but you do have to abide by it. So now I'm done with that. Can I use my product yet? Well, does it have a bulletin for it? Yes, it does. Now you have to go comply with that bulletin if you're in a PULA. So now I go buy a product. I meet my points, reduce my buffer, check for a bulletin. I'm either in or out. If I'm out, I just go use my product. If I'm in, follow those additional requirements. So how do you comply with pesticide labels now? Well, you use the label, 4 to 5 different websites, and a whole lot more math to make sure that you're in there. Now, the herbicide strategy was the first one out. That is final. It is going to start showing up on labels. The next is going to be the insecticide strategy. That is done in its draft form. We are expecting the final to come out very soon. This one will be a little different. Whereas plants and animals don't live on a farm, things like pollinators may move through a farm. So you can imagine that insecticide strategy may have a whole lot more to it than the herbicide strategy. We also have rodenticide strategy that is finalizing, fungicide strategy coming up, and then the vulnerable species draft will be finalized. So we have a lot more coming. It's going to be fast and furious the next few years. So this is a real shift that we are no longer doing product by product and we're making big sweeping decisions to the point where EPA may now be saying there are places that we will communicate to you that you cannot use pesticides, or there's extra things you have to do to be compliant. So we're going to have to be much more adaptable because there's lots of changes coming. But the good thing is that this is on websites. There's the ability for you, the farmer, to shift this in your favor as well. So what do you do? What is your takeaway? Familiarize yourself with Bulletins Live 2. Every time you see a BLT, I want you to think it's not just a sandwich, it's Bulletins Live 2. Google it, start using it, start practicing what this will look like in your operations so that you're ready to go when it is here. You can stay up to date with the additional changes. We've got a QR code for our website. We sometimes post things there. And then our blog. I try to do a blog every other week. If you like bad dad jokes, if you like sales on things like CEUs, if you're looking for CEUs and want a discount, we do that there. If you've ever wondered what a pesticide music playlist looks like, we've got some blogs with that. But that's where we tend to post much of our EPA updates, general safety information. We try to have a lot of fun with it. The key takeaways: don't panic. I know I threw a whole lot at you, but as I've spent more time in this system, I really think most Florida farmers are already going to be in compliance with all the things that you are doing today. It is just going to be keeping a few more pieces of paper to prove that you're some of the best farmers in the entire country. And again, the QR code there for Bulletins Live 2. And I believe I have time for questions, and we'll leave my email up there for just a little bit while we're thinking about questions, should you want to email.
Okay. The question is in regard to the points that are required in purchasing products. Does somebody have to prove their points before they purchase the product? Or they just need to, who's going to want to see that sheet?
So the points compliance, that would be FDAC. So your distributor is going to sell you any chemical because they can't know necessarily where every farm is and who needs what points, because it could differ across the state, right? So that will be an FDACS thing. So if FDACS came and they said, what products do you use? Oh, I use Blammo. Well, we know that Blammo requires 9 points. Can you show that you were able to get the 9 points before you use that product? So it would be no different than the FDACS inspections now in following the label.
So it's controlled after use?
Yes. So I would say this is no different than you buying products now and having to show that you're compliant with them. It's during an inspection when FDAC shows up. These will fall under that same thing. The only thing that a distributor is going to do to limit product is if it's a restricted use. You've got to show that you've got a license or you're a designated purchaser. They're not going to do compliance at that point.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? We have no further questions here in the room. I don't see any online. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would say, we've gotten very comfortable using our products. It seems like there haven't been as many changes here lately. I mean, there's been a handful of products here and there, but it hasn't been drastic. We're in a time where there is lots of change coming. So I just scratched the surface of the endangered species bit of this, but there is also a change coming to testing. Those of you that don't know, we no longer do paper exams. That stopped December 31st, just a handful of weeks ago. So no more paper exams are going to be given. And if you haven't heard, IFAS will no longer be doing testing after October 2025. Our computers will be broken at that point. FDACS is taking that over, and they've already got a vendor picked and all of that. So be paying attention to that. There are going to be changes to licensing and manuals, and the exams themselves are being rewritten. There's very likely some videos you're going to have to watch here in the next year or two to get into compliance. So there is a lot coming. The days of I've got my products, I've got my recommendations, I'm doing all the right things, keep doing that. But you've also got to pay extra attention to some of the things going on. So if you haven't been to some of the grower meetings, you haven't been as involved with IFAS Extension, you're going to want to reconnect for these next couple of years because there's a lot coming. And we're here to make sure that you can be compliant, but you don't know if you don't come in here.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for coming today.
No problem.
I would like to invite you to come back and join us in February on the 11th for a regional dairy agent update with Colleen Larson, who is out of the Okeechobee County Extension Office. And as always, whenever I send you today's reporting, I will also share with you a link to our website where you can find a PDF or a handout of today's PowerPoint. So you'll have easy access to those QR codes and links. And also the registration information for this Zoom in February. Another event coming up that may interest you is the 42nd Annual Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show that is held in Okeechobee at the Agri Civic Center. And that is January 23rd. It's a full day event. And I will include the information to register for this in case you're interested. Our field day coming up in April, save the date. That's April 17th, the full day event here at the center with talks and a tour of the field and a very good steak lunch and learning about some of our students' research. Let's see. So registration for that is going to open February 1st. And then if you're not already doing so, we invite you to follow us on social media, check out our website. And if you do not receive our Friday news by email, please send us a link, send us your information to that link there, and I will get you added to our contacts list. So thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Brett, for being a part. We really appreciate having you today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye, everybody.